Okay, so it's 2 o'clock. Let's get started. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're thrilled to be able to welcome you to Responsible Disruption and our 11th Innovation Table Zoomcast. My name is James Gamage and I'm the Director of Innovation and the Social Impact Lab at the United Way of Calgary and area.
And my name is Monique Blau and I'm the Director of Strategy and Design in the lab and at J5, a Calgary-based innovation design firm. And we are your co-hosts for Responsible Disruption. We're delighted to welcome our guests as we discuss creative power and the role of the arts and recovery. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we're currently gathered on the land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. The traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mahintis, which we now call the city of Calgary. This traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as Treaty 7 territory, which includes Kainai, Siksika, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda nations. We also would like to recognize the Métis people and the Inuit people who have made their home here in Calgary. With the sad events that are unfolding around the world, we cannot remain silent. We stand against racism and intolerance in any form, and we believe everyone deserves to live in equitable communities that are built on inclusion, diversity, understanding, and tolerance. At the Social Impact Lab, we strive to put people first, to create a diverse and inclusive culture where everyone feels safe and valued. So to kick things off, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. We are recording this session, so if you'd like to share it with your colleagues or friends, we will email you a follow-up link in the next couple of days. The recording will also be available on our YouTube channel. Our next Responsible Disruption Zoomcast is on July 8th at 2 p.m. And this will be a special episode focused on the food system in Calgary with local food critic Julie Van Rosenthal, Jean-Claude Mazunda from the Soccer Without Borders, and a third special guest to still be announced. This Zoomcast will signal the start of a week-long Disruptathon, which is a virtual event that will bring together Calgarians and citizens to collaboratively rethink how we might responsibly disrupt the food system. Watch for details tomorrow and on Monday, June 29th, when we put out a call for participating teams to register for our event on OpenCity. So let's go back to focusing on today. For our agenda, we will have introductions. We will do a lively conversation with our guests. We'll also have time for audience questions with a quick summary. If you'd like to ask questions along the way, you can do so by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom panel. We'll be collecting these throughout today's session and we'll answer as many as we can.
So our social systems are being disrupted and there is demand for new ideas, solutions, products and services. This demand for support continues to outpace the supply of funding. We in the Social Impact Lab, which is a collaboration between J5 and the United Way of Calgary and area, are responding to this disruption by investing in innovation, which we are calling responsible disruption, ensuring that any change that results is considered and fair to Calgarians and communities. Our Responsible Disruption Zoomcasts are a series of discussions with leading players about disruption in their fields. As the lockdown restrictions are gradually eased in Alberta, everyone is feeling their way towards recovery. In the United Way of Calgary and area, we are being careful and considered in our response, and like all organisations, we are adjusting to a world with regulations and new customer expectations. Arts organisations are feeling the acute impact of the lockdown. Physical distancing regulations have meant widespread closure, impacting venue income and the livelihood of artists. But the arts has a wider role in society that goes beyond just cheering people up or providing a short-term distraction through entertainment. The arts engender so much more than that and can contribute to long-term outcomes of recovery and rebuilding of communities. Today on our Zoomcast, we are speaking to 3 leaders from around the world about the role the arts can play in recovery and healing. They originally came together at an artistic residency in Paris in January of 2020, just before the lockdown started, and will bring a great perspective to our discussion. So who are our guests? Firstly, we have Alexandra Hatcher. Alexandra has worked with and for non-profit and public sector cultural organisations throughout her career. Positions have included Director, Musée Heritage Museum in St Albert, Civic Partner Consultant with the City of Calgary, and Director of Site Operations for Alberta Culture and Tourism, and Executive Director and CEO of the Alberta Museums Association. Her consulting practice is focused on facilitating strategic planning work, supporting good governance practice, determining impact, and building capacity in the non-profit and cultural sector. Alexandra has worked recently with a variety of organisations including Arts Commons, United Way Calgary, and the Royal British Columbia Museum. In 2019, Alexandra partnered with Crystal Willey to form Hatlie Group, a consulting firm supporting success and sustainability of cultural organisations. Recent clients include Calgary Stampede, Alberta Aviation Museum, and Fort Calgary. Karina Muñiz-Pagán is a queer Zycana writer, literary translator, and community organizer. She has an MFA in prose from Mills College in Oakland, California, where she was awarded the Community Engagement Fellowship and co-founded the Writers Collective, Las Malcriadas. She has also earned MAs in Urban Planning and Latin American Studies from UCLA and has led and supported campaigns focused on housing, labor, and immigrant rights. Karina is a contributing author of the books Endangered Species, Enduring Values, an anthology of San Francisco writers of color, and Working for Justice, the LA model for organizing and advocacy. She is an alumna of Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation and works at the National Domestic Workers Alliance as Creative Strategies lead organizer. She lives in Long Beach, California, and is currently working on a memoir called Fly Girl. Zsuzsi Page is a cultural professional with an MA in International Relations. Over the past 7 years, she has worked in Reading in the UK, demonstrating art's link with economic growth, creating community and a sense of place. In all of the programs that she has curated, as well as all festivals that she has run, Zsuzsi has integrated the belief in the power of art to unite, promote change, start discussions, and bring communities together. Zsuzsi ran Reading Year of Culture in 2016, started the Reading Thames Festival in 2017, created the Festive Season program, and has been festival director of the award-winning Reading Fringe Festival for the past 7 years. Zsuzsi is currently the Reading Place of Culture lead for Reading UK. Her previous 7 years of working in Reading, she worked in China and America on a number of cultural projects, producing plays that encouraged audiences to discuss difficult topics on one hand and then be wildly entertained on the other, including a show for the first Shanghai Pride and the city's first pantomime. Welcome to you all. So just before I start the formal questioning, I'd like to just prompt the audience for questions. So we want this to be as interactive a session as possible. So please use the Q&A box to post your questions, and Monique and myself will ask those questions of the guests. So please ask questions away, and we'll make sure that this is an interactive session. So anyway, we've heard your introductions, and we've heard a little bit about what brought you together with the residency in Paris in January 2020. But can I ask Karina first to tell us a bit about that residency? So what did you learn from the experience, and what did you take away personally?
Sure. So first off, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all my fellow panelists and all of you who are here watching this with us as well. Happy that you joined us. So as you mentioned, the Lay Arts residency that I participated in was in January 2020 of this year. It was a multidisciplinary artist residency, thanks to the leadership and vision of Mila, who's the director. And it was really an opportunity for artists of all forms to come together: musicians, dancers, writers, theater directors, actors, painters, as well as cultural professionals, to understand the 1920s decade, what that could bring for us today as artists, what that means, and gave us an opportunity to really explore, play, learn. So that was kind of the idea of us all coming together as a multidisciplinary art residency. And then in terms of my own personal experience and what I learned, I would say first and foremost, the experience that I have that I really want to just recognize is the kindred spirits that I met while at this residency. It was an incredible time to meet so many people who were both extremely talented, who are curious about the world, who wanted as artists to interpret the world and make this place a better place, to transform it, to understand the history, to be able to make that transformation happen today. And to find such an ability that we were able to really connect, collaborate, support one another. And this has led to us continuing to collaborate today as we're on this call right now, but continuing to do creative projects together at a time that we couldn't have anticipated would happen in January.
Cool, thank you. So one of the collaborations that you've written is an essay which is sort of been compiled, and I think Alexandra will sort of showcase that later when we in the discussion. But I noticed when I read the essay that your own experience, you in your time in Paris, you experienced a different Paris than you expected. And you wrote in your paper about various experiences that shaped your thinking. Would you like to expand on one or two of those?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I came into Paris with the intent of just given the world that we live in, knowing that Paris is often told from a Eurocentric narrative, and I wanted to understand Paris in a different way. And so I think the ways that it helped was we had a class led by Malik Crumpler from Paris Lit Up, who talked about Dadaism and the ways in which the salons of the 20s gave people that the ability to kind of render meaning to a world that was left meaningless after World War I, and have interruptions. So there would be times in which there'd be creativity happening and thinking about the world, and then there would be an interruption. So I started to understand the city that way in terms of its own interruptions. And those were some of the things that I took from it. One example being that I learned, there were 300 different Latin American artists that came to Paris during the 1920s era that we didn't know much. I didn't know much about before, that there was that many Latin American artists that were leaving political upheaval in their own countries, whether it be in Latin America or the Caribbean, to come to Paris to create as well. I wanted to learn more about the stories of Black artists that were coming from the US that were leaving systemic racism, anti-Black racism and brutality of the 1920s in the US to find community and home and create in the 1920s there. So I started learning about their stories, the Jessie Fawcett stories, the Ada Bricktop Smith stories. And then another thing that was completely new to me that I found beautiful, and it ties into the ways in which we're collaborating today, was learning more about the queer and trans and gender non-binary people at the time that might not have had that language, but that's how they were living their lives. Jane Heap comes to mind as someone who founded the Little Review, which was a way for writers to come together and publish their own work through the Little Review. So one of the things that we're also doing is we've been able to create our Little Review from the residency as well, and be able to share images of the dancers, of the writers, of the painters, and our stories. So it's kind of a way, a portal that's being led and edited by Kelly Burke, who is part of our residency, to then produce a Little Review today.
Thank you, thank you. So can I move to Alex now? Are there any, you're obviously at the residency yourself in Paris, are there any key themes that you noted from your experience out there that can be applied today? So as we look to creativity and how it flourished in Paris in the 1920s, and the willingness to test and try new things in the art world, how is this articulated in today's modern world?
One of the things that we went into the conversation with was looking at that similarity between what was happening in the 1920s, specifically in France and Paris, and what was happening today in our world leading into the 2020s. And the residency was set up as a way to mark that 100th anniversary specifically. So we actually, my business partner and I, did research to see, okay, from an organizational perspective, from what was happening in that upheaval, what where are the commonalities? And it's really interesting, you know, we were looking at things like racism and issues around immigration, workers' rights, women's rights, income disparity, gender inequality, colonization, and that was kind of the slide for context for 1920s, and then the slide for the context for the 2020s, exactly the same. And now even, you know, the pandemic in the 2020s, they were starting that decade with the Spanish flu, and look at what we're dealing now with the start of the 2020s with COVID. So the similarities were really strong, and so strong that we started to look at, okay, well, what came out of that time that we can look at today as being the lessons learned and learning from that history, and looking at how to support artists in where they are, how to support organizations and the challenges that they're facing, and the way in which organizations were back then, it was different, but what can we learn from a systems, networking, collaboration, partnerships perspective, which absolutely were a part of the ecosystem back then, that are without question a significant part of success for us going forward from this moment in our history here. And that collaboration, that support, that network, understanding who your communities are, all of those pieces have tied into not only the work that was presented and worked on in Paris when the residency was taking place, but has without question moved the conversation of those 20 or so individuals who were participating together into work that, like Karina mentioned with the little review and with the publication for Creative Power, is continuing. And there is a life beyond that incredible moment back what seems a million years ago now, but just 6 months ago.
Yeah, and thinking about, you know, if I think about, you know, what we're talking about today, about recovery from the pandemic and some of the social issues that we have at the moment, as an organization, we're talking a lot about resiliency and agility, and did you see any kind of parallel back to 1920s Paris with the role of the arts in building that resiliency and agility?
For me, yes, there definitely was. There was an openness and willingness to experiment and try new things. And that was a bit of an outcome of the time. And upheaval was just kind of baked into everything. So there was an openness to doing that. But I think the trust that the artists had with each other definitely allowed for new work, new ways of working to emerge. And I'd say that is, without question of a doubt, something that, as we look to now, what are the things that are going to be required? And that trust and openness, which is where we started our collaboration with the others that are in our group of essays, was, well, what are the common threads today? And that trust and openness was front and center for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just moving that forward, Zsuzsi, you know, as we've just said, we can see a lot of very similar themes in the world today, as we could see back in 1920s Paris. And in some respects, the world feels a little bit broken at the moment. Building on what Alex has pointed and addressed, is there anything else that you feel we could learn from 1920s Paris?
Yeah, I think it's really the role of cultural hubs and how important they are going to be in our recovery. What was completely amazing about that, the residency that we had, is it gave me an opportunity to really immerse myself and realize and see the outcomes from some of the cultural hubs from the 1920s. And then going back to a context in Reading where my role is very much in the economic sector, and constantly trying to ensure that culture is embedded in that narrative and how it can support economic objectives. It was like I'd come back with all of this amazing information that I could just gently drop into conversation on a regular basis with people that resonated with, and people who are stakeholders in ensuring the future of culture in our community.
Yeah, that's excellent. And sort of, can you sort of unpack what that means in your community in Reading? You know, give examples of how maybe the arts can help connect communities and break down barriers of social isolation or the like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest things is creating that shared experience, isn't it? That you can all kind of reflect on and have had that shared experience, and it doesn't matter what background you're from or anything, it's that you have this point that you can reference, and it is a created shared experience that can bring happiness, can improve your mental health. And a lot of those things are directly related to underpinning a healthy economy as well. A healthy community is really important for a healthy economy. And I think that that's one of the really big things that creating these great, massive shared experiences that are open to everyone, no matter what background, that are accessible, is really important for community building, and thereby supporting the economy and a great place to live, which again is really important in attracting people to your town.
Yeah, cool, good.
I'm curious, Zsuzsi, if you can speak a little bit, so that creative economy, I'm curious about what it does to transform a community, like, you know, around job creation or maybe socioeconomic progress, innovation. What have you seen through that lens?
In terms of the progress, the economic progress, and a lot of it is around creating confidence and ensuring that people, one of the biggest outcomes that we've seen from engaging people in arts projects and community projects is that level of confidence that they gain as a result, that they can put into their jobs in the future. So at the moment we have a lot of digital projects that are happening. I can reference one, for example, is with the over 70s. You know, it's comedy for the over 70s, and they're comedy workshops, and they learn how to use things like Zoom and their computers, and again working with young people and under 18s. They are creating their own stories and performing their own stories, but what they're using is they're using a range of technologies, working in teams, which are going to be incredibly important for their future employability. So there are a number of wonderful projects like that, and not to mention the teamwork, the confidence in creating an environment where they're directly engaging in teamwork and working together to create a product, which is essentially managing a project, but they don't realize they're doing it. So there are so many outcomes like that. We've had a number of employers come in. I can reference one particular event that we did. We worked with a number of young people from UTC, which is technology college in Reading, and we asked them to design lighting installations. And we said, okay, right, we want you to do something for our festive season, and we want you to light up our town. And the innovation that they showed just through designing these in their teams was absolutely incredible. They were taking the things that they had learnt at school in the classroom and directly applying them to something that was going to be very, very visible for the whole community. And that was really interesting to employers as well, because they could then show their practical experience of working, and they were working with the fabricators to create these pieces. They're working with professionals who've been in their field for a very long time. So the confidence that comes with that and the employability that is linked to applying those skills that they've learned in the classroom is incredible.
That's great, thank you. I think it's really interesting to try and understand the opportunity that exists around this role of cultural hubs and art to really potentially ground an economy and transform how we can look at youth becoming, you know, large, valuable contributors. And then also those people that are getting to a place where they're retiring, how are they contributing to shaping that narrative? Alex, I see you nodding. Is there something you'd love to add to that?
Well, it ties into one of the sort of the common threads that we saw in the work with those that we were participating with in January, and that was that idea of the creative ecology, and that everyone is a part of that. It's not just about being an artist with a capital A. It's about everyone, as in Calgary we learned, you know, we live with how we live a creative life. And that interconnectedness, whether it's about the expression and actually making art, or discovery and coming across something or figuring out something new, like the comedy with the over 70s, that's awesome. Or appreciation and just sort of realizing the importance of the arts to our world. And that all of that kind of comes together in this little ecosystem, that creative ecology that impacts literally every single person. And one of the things that I think has been really interesting for me since coming back to Calgary and with COVID, is that when everything sort of started to shut down and the pandemic really took over, it was shocking a little bit to me how many people turned to arts and culture for healing, for comfort, and for something to do, right? Like the arts became this, all of a sudden, everybody was doing something related to artistic practice or creative living. And whether that was, engaging in online exhibitions or online activities, whether it was the curbside concerts that are happening from one of our amazing musicians here in Calgary, or all the other multiple things that people have been doing, community associations, spontaneous art projects. One of my communities that would never have done that. We've had 3 so far. And all of those things, it has been fascinating to watch, to see the value of creativity in that part of our life, which is so important, that health and well-being, our mental well-being, our physical well-being, it is connected to everything. So when we sort of link it back to the recovery, it is of value to all human beings.
Yeah. Karina, I'm actually really curious because in one of your essays, The Narrative Power of Place, you really looked at how artists shape the city and the influence of creative power, not only in the sense of Paris, but on a global scale. And as Alex talks about this lens of how do I live a creative life, I'm curious as to what you would say to people that are trying to figure out what their own creative power is. Because I think identifying that can be challenging for those of us that don't think we're creative. I'm curious if you could shape some of that thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as I'm shaping it there, as I answer the question about shaping, your creative power today, some of the conversation that's come up has brought some ideas to me too about what are we thinking about in terms of how are we investing in communities and art and culture today. And so I think it's important. I appreciate how you opened up the webinar, because I think it is absolutely important to recognize this historic uprising we are seeing today in defense of Black lives, to recognize and see how it's happening on such a global scale. I think it calls in, as we're talking about both historical and present, it calls in 400 years of Black resistance, it calls in decades of Black organizing, and it calls in this moment where we are being led by Black leadership on a scale that we see from Paris to so many other countries across the world. And so I think that as artists, our role is to really understand how we can support this transformative moment that we're in defense of Black lives. So for me, what that looks like is, one, listening and following Black leadership, us doing our own organizing in our own communities to unpack issues that often are, I think, uncomfortable and are hard, but are absolutely necessary for transformation. So I can speak for myself, as a non-Black Latinx person, that means us having conversations within Latinx community about anti-Black racism, colorism, white privilege. What does it mean to be pro-Black? How do we center Black, Latina, and Latino voices? And then on the arts part, and I do feel like as artists, we part of our role often, I think, is to give people the ability to reflect and interpret what's happening. So I think we can all step into that. And I think the power is being willing to step into that uncomfort, to be willing to both listen and follow if you're a non-Black artist, and also to be honest and figure out what does solidarity as a verb actually really look like in this moment. And then on a real practical level, some of the things that I'm thinking about, and this is me coming from, I live in Los Angeles County, and I'm, part of supporting, both me as an individual, my organization, are part of the support for defunding the police. And so for us, what defunding the police looks like is, how do you invest both in Black communities? How do you invest in communities of color in general? And so I can speak to the city of LA, for example. The budget is, the 50% of our budget in the city of LA, and I live in Long Beach, is 40% goes to the police. So what would that city budget look like if we really said, hey, we want art and culture to be funded, and we actually want Black and brown youth to be at the center of what that funding can look like? Imagine the potential. So I hear Zsuzsi talking about youth, or imagine what the potential could be around intergenerational conversations that can be happening, and how we can recognize this transformational moment that we're in, that we all have a role to play in that. So I would think that's one way to sort of tap into the power. And then another, and I just want to lift up, I want to lift up all these incredible residents that were also in the space with us, is Fiona from Blue Goat Theater in Germany was able to put together this 23-hour play festival that we got to participate in which in 24 hours, I was part of the dance edition, where we got to work with dancers and musicians and writers to create something within 5 minutes. That was one of the elements, the 4 elements. So our group picked Earth, but it was incredibly, it was at the time where, you know, I both have in-laws and work with a lot of folks in New York, and New York was at the epicenter of so much loss. The folks that I work with, 90% of them were losing their jobs, their caregivers, their house cleaners, their nannies. So it was like this ability to take the grief. And I just want to recognize wherever people were, wherever they are in COVID, it's the first time also, I think we've been feeling grief on a global scale at such a communal level. It was our ability to take that and either make humor out of it. You know, Kunji did incredible humor in his performance with the other writers. Just create something that gave us space to do that. So I think we should be continuing to have these ways in which technology can be used to our favor, where we can. You know, I was working with someone in Germany and in London, and here I am in LA, and we created something that anybody could access the next day. There were folks from so many different places coming together. So I think this is the moment that we can use that inner reflection and really think about what collaboration looks like now.
I love the sense that collaboration today means something so different than it might have even, you know, 6 months ago or 3 months ago, for that fact, when we thought we needed to be in person. But now we've really got this space where you can truly transform something on a global scale and collaborate in that way. I'm curious, Zsuzsi, and Alex too, but Zsuzsi, you know, you're in the UK. You've had the opportunity to collaborate with these wonderful ladies on our show today and a number of other guests, but how are you continuing to create that, maintain that momentum that you started?
Well, I mean, it was incredible because actually taking a week out, I was so worried about it. I have 3 children, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to leave my family. I'm so worried about leaving my partner for a week. And, you know, for the past 9 years, I've just been work constantly. And I think anyone who is a freelancer can probably appreciate that that's kind of what you have to do in order to, or that's what you feel you have to do. So actually taking this week out was like I'd taken an entire year off and really restored my mental health, restored my passion for my job. But what was most beautiful about it is that I met so many, I mean, everyone was just incredible and so supportive. So it really made me reflect on the fact that actually, if you are a practitioner, you have to take time out so that you can learn to re-love what you are doing. In a way, that worked for me anyway. So how I'm continuing is that I'm making sure that I can just stay connected with all of my colleagues that I met and friends on the week out. And because I run the Fringe Festival, which we are very inspired by Canada, so thank you very much. We run that, and because this new digital realm has served us so well, really, I mean, we've been very lucky. We were given a grant from the Arts Council to continue our work and deliver our festival online. So actually what we found has happened is that there are really no barriers to access now. We can work with all of these amazing people from across the world without actually having to bring them physically to Reading. So if anything, we've been really lucky in that we've grasped the opportunity to make sure that we can hold on to as many of the wonderful moments that we had in Paris as possible. We are working with, again, Fiona from Blue Goat Theatre and a number of the wonderful residents who were part of the residency on creating a brand new piece that was born out of the residency. We're working with one of the dancers who was there, and he's very kindly said that we could use a couple of his videos, you know, so this opportunity for us to collaborate more closely, create further relationships, because when you're creating new work, it very much relies on that trust and those relationships that you build over such a long period of time. So I'm really excited for now next year, if we get to collaborate again, the amazing art that will come out of those relationships. I'm
going to build on that, and there's a couple of questions that have just come into the question box, and I'm very excited about one question in particular, and I'll start with that one because it's a little bit about collaboration, but also it's from Australia, which shows that we're going truly global with responsible disruption. So the question is from Helen Hopcroft. So hello, Helen. Hi folks, lovely to see you, Karina, Alex and Zsuzsi. I live in the small country town of Maitland, New South Wales, Australia. A number of the local businesses in our main shopping district are beginning to fail. I'm wondering if you can suggest any practical strategies artists can use to support local economies. Anybody?
I mean, I'm happy to.
Go on, why don't you start weighing in?
I'm actually, hello, Helen. Actually inspired by Helen answering this particular question. There's a great book called Creating Cities, and it was the takeover of empty shops. And so artists went in and took over that space and reanimated the shops and the failing retail area, which is incredibly important because a lot of it is about what it looks like. Is it inviting? Do I want to go down there? Why should I leave when I can order on Amazon? You know, so that the retail is changing so dramatically. So when I work with clients in the retail industry, we are looking at creating unique customer experiences, which is really, really important because we want to drive people back to the town centres because that is the heart of our community as well. So it means so much for us to go there, connect and have this shared experience. So we put on these large scale outdoor events where we bring the community together. We get them involved in parades. We did a whale parade one year where we created the world's largest puppet whale out of plastic and school children engaged in that. So I think it's about looking at who your community is and how best to access them. So Reading is a particularly young town. The average age is 34 and we have large numbers of families. And if we want those people to come back to our town centres, we have to figure out how to engage them in arts events. And the main way to engage them is through the schools. So that was our route to market. So I think it's about looking at who is coming to your town centre, why they're coming to your town centre, and then creating a unique experience that they cannot turn down to bring them back to town centres.
I love that, you know, filling those sort of ghostly empty spaces that you might see in town centres or in empty shops with, but also, you know, looking at your market and looking at how you can do that most effectively. So that's a great answer. Anyone else that want to weigh in on that one? Alex?
Yeah, and the question ties into more than just retail establishments, but it also connects into arts organizations, cultural organizations, museums, galleries, etc. As a whole, because there are going to be a lot of, I put this loosely out there, failures. There are going to be a lot of closures, potential dissolutions of organizations because they were not able to be sustainable. And I think, well, in our work at Hatlie, one of the things we know to be true is that you need to know who it is you are serving. Who are your users? Who are your communities? Identify them specifically and tying into what Zsuzsi said, and then find out what it is that they need. What do they want? And how can you give it to them in a way that is engaging to a point point where they want to come back again and again. And it seems very simple to say that on this side of the table, but it really is one of those pillars that are required for success. Whether you're a retail establishment or an arts organization or whatever, you need to know who you're serving. And if you're not giving them what they need, they won't come back, especially at this point in time. And then there's the systems and the structures that need to change as well. But really, users and your potential users, your communities are absolutely key in understanding how to be successful going forward.
Karina, anything on that one, or there is another question we could move to?
Oh, I mean, the only other thing I think that comes to mind, it's just a different angle, I think, around like what local artists can do for cities right now. I think about all of the incredible murals that have come up since the uprisings have began. You know, murals of George Floyd here in Long Beach and Oakland. There's incredible artists that are just really coming together and painting a vision of who we want to be in the city. So that has been just beautiful to see, sort of street art and protest, but offering an aesthetic as well to the city. And then I was just thinking on a level as we are in reconfiguring economies right now, what that looks like. Mutual aid societies have mutual aid networks, I should say, have built up throughout different cities here in the US, and I'm sure you all have mutual aid networks as well in other places, where I think there can be a role of artists as we think about the ways in which we trade, support, barter, thinking out through different systems and abilities as we see, you know, to predatory capitalism failing so many people at the time of COVID. So I think people are thinking of innovative and creative ways to support one another right now.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, the next question actually is has just come in from Riley, and this is about, you know, actually it's specific to Calgary actually, but I guess it has broader relevance as well. So how can artists engage with those that need to hear their messages better? Balancing the aesthetic of the work with the instructional or learning portion seems like a challenge. If the work is too out there, it won't reach those who need to hear it. If it is too based on the aesthetic and metaphor, it can lessen the message. It seems like we are in the ideal world for the work of Brecht, epic theatre, bold theatre of the oppressed. Yet those who will interact with are more likely those who don't need to get the message. Note the Calgary controversial arts projects here in Calgary. So, you know, I'm getting the sense there from Riley, you know, is the people that need to hear the message, can we actually put the message out in a way that they're going to listen to without compromising the artisticness or the way that we're trying to express the message? Anyone want to pick up on that?
What? Oh, sorry, Karina.
No, Zsuzsi, I just spoke. Go ahead, Zsuzsi. I'll go after you.
I think the biggest thing for me, with the artists that I work with, the artists that I find really interesting are the ones that don't compromise on how they deliver their message. And I think it's about, I'm not an artist myself, but I think it's about making sure that you are out there as much as possible, being your own best promoter. And the more people you reach and explain your message to, the more likely it is to get to the people that you need it to get to. That's been my experience with alternative art, potentially.
So shock factor can actually cut through as well. Mm. Yeah. Okay, cool. Karina?
Yeah, well, I'm just appreciative that you brought up role in the theater of the oppressed, because I do feel like that is a great example of how we're able to, you know, kind of break that fourth wall, have audience engage and participate while still maintaining your authenticity of what it is you're trying to create. And, you know, I can speak to an example of what I think has been working for us. As you mentioned, James, I'm part of a writers collective called Las Malcriadas, which is based primarily of Latina immigrant domestic worker women who are writers. And our whole premise has been, the right to write. You don't necessarily need a formal education to write. In fact, oftentimes the stories that I moved and loved the most come from folks who have such lived experience, but maybe not always have access to the craft of writing. So we did a lot of theater of the oppressed techniques in these writing workshops as stories came about. And now we were able to do a virtual workshop. And I think the ways in which we were able to get folks who might not have similar stories, but want to engage and want to think differently is both to share, like Zsuzsi was mentioning, just to share the narratives. And I do believe that oftentimes what people say, right, the universal is in the unique. So being able to share those moments, and then we offered opportunity for people to write themselves. So they wrote on Facebook Live, they wrote on the Zoom webinar, open enough questions that anybody could answer and write and do a writing exercise together. And then we were able to share all of that and build on this virtual way that we hadn't anticipated was possible before until we were forced to pivot and figure out how to engage with a different audience. So I appreciate the question.
Good.
Can I just add on
yeah,
to that?
Of course.
So Riley, you can't force someone to listen to you, unfortunately. And I think Karina and Zsuzsi's responses were quite enlightening. And I go back to that part of our previous part of our conversation when we talked about collaboration. Sometimes the best way to is to actually co-labor together. So bringing people of diverse opinions together to learn and once again build that trust with each other, because no one is going to listen if they don't trust what the message might be, if it's, you know, completely polar opposite to the one you want to get out there. But having courage to put the message out there is very important.
I really like what you said, that you can't force people to listen to you. And, you know, I'd like to take a second to talk to you, Zsuzsi, about, you know, something that happened in your community on Saturday in Reading. And for those of you on our show that don't know Reading, Reading would be very similar to Red Deer, kind of a transition point between locations. But there was a tragic event where 3 people died through what's been coined as a terrorist attack. And I'm curious if you can kind of build on this idea that, you know, what does it take to reimagine, to bring together a community again when you've suffered this kind of trauma, but knowing that you can't force people to listen to you. So how do you ground that, and what are you going to be able to do, or how are you looking forward to kind of transitioning this?
Thank you for the question. It's one that we're all really struggling with at the moment. We're an incredibly tight-knit community. We're a town with very much a town mentality. So, and we are all connected with, you know, by one person. So the majority of people will have known of the people who unfortunately lost their lives on Saturday. And it's really difficult as well because of the lockdown measures. You know, the thing that you need most is to come together and be together and hug one another and cry together, and then carry that with you in a reimagined community where you have to carry this loss and the anger that's associated with that and the confusion. So it's obviously still quite fresh, and it's very, very difficult for the community, especially because 3 of the communities actually, because it happened on a day that was a Black Lives Matter movement on the day that had ended, but obviously first reports, no one really knew. At the asylums seekers as well in our community, we are a city of sanctuary. And then the 3 members who unfortunately lost their lives are LGBTQ members who are very heavily involved in Reading Pride. So that alone is enough to send shockwaves through our community. we are an incredibly close-knit community, and I just wanted to actually share with you one of the things that Reverend Jesse Jackson said when he visited Reading in 2011. He said that the audience of 1,200 people in Portman Road was something he'd never seen before, and it wasn't because they were Black, Asian, and white people all in the audience together. He said that he'd seen that in many places, but he said it was because they all clearly knew one another, were friends, and sat together, not in ethnic groups. And I think if anything is coming out of this, it's how we want to be defined as a town. We do want to stand together. We do want to celebrate our diversity, and that is how we are moving forward. In all of the artwork that has been created by our very wonderful arts community, by our university, in response to this tragedy, has all been celebrating that same message. We stand together, we are together, we appreciate our diversity, we love our diversity, and everyone is still welcome here. And I think that that is going to be the main core of how we move forward. We do need to come together as a community, and that is something that we are working very hard on at the moment, looking at all of the restrictions that have been placed on us. We really feel that we need to come together as a town and grieve, and that will be done appropriately and following guidelines, obviously. But we are looking at art installations. Community members are looking at memorials that we want to put into place, and the visual arts community are really contributing to helping heal some of that, helping us deal with some of that pain moving forward by allowing us to celebrate the fact that we are an inclusive community. We do love our community, and we are one community, regardless of race, creed, or background. So I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit, but art will play a huge role in that, and help us just feel, hopefully carry it forward in as positive a way as possible.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very fresh, like you said, and there's still lots that you're navigating, and it's very complex. But even through what you've shared, there is this thread that I'm hearing from all of our guests, and James, asked them questions, but there's this lens of finding this common ground. And once you can find this common ground, then how do you transform that into something that people can embrace and then make into their own, right? Take it as part of their own voice. Alex, you work a lot with organizations, and you look at, through the Hatlie group, but there's, I think, 4 things specifically that you consider through your work, and I'm not going to remember them off the top of my head, but sustainability might be one, community. And I wonder if you can touch a bit on that as it relates to even what, Zsuzsi has experienced and things that they could think about that we could all take away.
Right. So one of the things that we focus on is around sustainability, and what does that mean for organizations specifically, or communities as well. But looking at it from a very holistic lens and understanding that it is not an end goal, right? So as you're moving through, whether you're looking at it from we use a model that's very, again, holistic, and it has a series of facets. So it's culture, health and well-being, environment, financial, and social responsibility, and looking at all of those connected. And then when you're going through a process of change, it's about understanding sustainability from a place of transition. So sustainability is about understanding that you need to change, or that change is being forced upon you as we are in this moment, right? So change management 101, there needs to be a catalyst. Well, here we are. Then second is that transition, and it's looking at, okay, well, what is the process we need to deal with? What are the things that are going to change, and identifying those. Then into renewal, and actually participating in the change, thinking about it. Okay, what are the things that we need to bring in from an organizational perspective, and that's the lens that we do our work primarily. And then community, and it's about building around the change and building with community in the change. And that community piece is kind of that connector to all the others, right? It's very much a cyclical process. And when you're thinking about sustainability of an organization, being agile and flexible and having an openness, trust, all of the things we've talked about today, collaboration, co-laboring together, those things, sustainability, transition, renewal, and community, all have a significant part to play in where and what success could look like for organizations, communities, or individuals who are trying to look at their own practices as well. But
Yeah.
those common threads are something that we all saw in our work from all different disciplines, all different sizes of communities, all different backgrounds, countries, and cities that we all came from when we gathered together back 6 months ago. But the incredible connections between the work that was being done was really, a light was shone on that, and finding where are those commonalities in our own world, in our own individual worlds, in our homes, and with our geographic communities. They're there, and it's our responsibility to go out and find them and build on those.
Thanks for that. Karina, I wondered if there's anything else you wanted to add, but I did have one quick thing around this question, is this lens of each community finding, sustainability, transition, renewal, but you're all from 3 different parts of our great world. And is there things that we can learn from each other that we can then portray in our own communities? And Karina, maybe I could put that over to you to start us off.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Absolutely. I think that, well, one, we're seeing that, again, mentioning the uprisings, we're seeing that on a global scale. So we're continuously learning from each other. But I think, when Zsuzsi, for example, talks about Reading, when I got a chance to learn from her about Reading, there was like so many parallels I drew to Long Beach, where I live, Long Beach, California, and LA County. And I think there's lots of ways in which we can learn about that. Like where are the ways in which we can be continuing to think about arts and culture in our city? We talked about the possibility of like, what would a sister city look like? How could we do that? We are also a sanctuary city and want to make sure that continues to happen. And I come from San Francisco and also a sanctuary city, and remember the times in which that was attacked for various reasons. And so I think we can continuously be learning about how we're building community on that level and sharing across and sharing out those stories. So I know this hasn't come to fruition, but Zsuzsi and I were, talking and brainstorming, like, what would that look like? How could we have stories, from our cities of, you've spoken about, the writing group that you've done within the immigrant and refugee community in Reading, right? And so what could we be building in that way? My sort of main vision is consistently about those folks who have often been marginalized, to bring their voices to the center and create space and accessibility for that to happen. And so I think those of us who might have access and within certain institutions, what is our role to be able to do that? And we certainly can learn across, when Alex talks about sustainability and understanding organizations as an ecosystem, I think that's all important for us to learn about. I come from the nonprofit world for many years. And so clearly sustainability and what that really looks like, what that means is important as we see the economy shifting and tanking, frankly. So how are we thinking about the ways in which sustainability is going to look? And then I would say, things that are often lifted up by the residents in our group, artists need to be funded and valued for their work. And the ways in which we can be building and continue to have that conversation to recognize the importance of artists being valued.
Thank you. So we're getting close to time. We do have one more audience question. So I'm going to ask to see if you can each answer it succinctly, maybe just a couple keywords. But what advice can you share for how we can all tap into our creative selves, especially during a time like this? Alex, do you want to take the start?
Sure. Only in a few words. Be open. There's a lot out there. And if you don't know where to start, well, in Calgary Arts Development, CADA has a great website with lots of resources on it. But sometimes it's just being open to what is out there.
Thank you. Zsuzsi?
I would actually echo Alex. It's openness, and taking time to allow yourself to connect with other people is hugely powerful. And especially if you allow yourself to connect with people who you maybe haven't worked with before ever. So they're not from your community, they're not people that you already know on Facebook or have any connection to. And I think that's what was really powerful about Paris.
Karina.
I'd add, yes, as much as we're saying technology is great, is limit the screen time and play. You know, I would say the residency, like having the ability to be with dancers and musicians and painters, like I was, you know, I filled with life and creativity after that. So if there's something that you've wanted to do, but you haven't, you're like, that's not for me, do it in your home. Nobody can see, just play, dance, listen to music. All of those things, I think, we need that creativity as just human beings on the planet right now.
Fantastic.
And one of the things, sorry, Monique, one of the things that we, within the work that Zsuzsi, Karina, and our colleagues are doing, a call to action is a part of that. So sort of as we sort of wrap up here, maybe for those who are not sure what to do, commit to at least one thing in the next, let's say, month. And that one thing can be very simple. It can be, okay, if you've never drawn before, take some chalk and just draw on your sidewalk, right? Or put on a musician from Spotify that you've never listened to before, or read a book from an artist a writer of color, or an Indigenous writer. Like commit to something that maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable with, or maybe a little bit afraid of, because that's where that learning and that understanding and that trust will start to grow.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So on that note, I want to thank our three guests today. Thank you for leading boldly, for helping us start to think about how we can live a creative life. Also for our audience, thank you for participating. If you'd like to continue to engage with us on this topic and many others, you can do so by signing up through Open City, which is our open innovation platform. And also you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, LinkedIn. Our session was recorded, so share it with your family and friends. And lastly, our next Responsible Disruption Zoomcast is July 8th. And remember, this is the kickoff to our week-long Disrupt-a-thon. We look forward to bringing people together to collaborate and rethink our food system. Lastly, thank you to our technical lead, Paige Ross and Vicky Laszlo. Thanks for joining us today. Be safe and stay healthy.